Okay, so I wasn't going to share this, but the more I think about it, the more I feel like I need to. Maybe it'll be therapeutic, or maybe someone will believe me, because honestly, I barely believe it myself. This happened about a year ago, and it's still screwing with my head. I have to get it off my chest because I can't keep this inside anymore. And trust me, this is not some clickbait bullshit. This is real. It happened, and it still haunts me every day. So here it goes. It was one of those late nights. You know, when you're bored out of your mind, can't sleep, and you're just scrolling through your phone doing nothing. I was flipping between YouTube videos and Reddit posts. Nothing unusual. It was around 2 a.m. I had this sudden urge to just get out of the house. You ever feel that? Like no matter how tired you are, you just have to get some air? I hadn't gone out in a while, and that night I was craving some bad fast food, like greasy, regret the next morning kind of stuff. Only problem was, I didn't have my car. My friend borrowed it for a road trip, and I was left stranded at home. That's when the stupid idea popped into my head. I don't even remember exactly how I stumbled on it, but somehow I found this sketchy-ass website that advertised itself as a dark web Uber, like some underground off-the-grid ride service for people who didn't want to use the regular apps for whatever reason. I mean, you hear about this stuff online, but you never actually think it's real, right? But my curiosity got the better of me. I had been drinking a bit, and I wasn't exactly thinking straight, so I decided to try it. I thought, what's the worst that could happen? I had to download this encrypted browser, and then there it was. It wasn't a polished website, just a black page with a few buttons. You had to enter your location manually, none of that automatic GPS stuff like Uber or Lyft. And the pricing? Dirt cheap, like ridiculously cheap. I figured it was just some hacker playing a prank, but whatever. I put in my address and selected a drop-off spot near a 24-hour diner I used to hit up when I had the munchies late at night. After a few minutes, I got a notification. Your ride will arrive in 10 minutes. And that's when I should have stopped, right then. I should have just shut my computer, gone to bed, and laughed about it in the morning. But no, I was too intrigued. I waited. I live in a small town, so there's not a lot of traffic late at night, especially around my neighborhood. When I saw headlights pull up outside, my gut sank. It was a beat-up old sedan. No markings, no Uber or Lyft sticker on the window, just a plain, dirty car. The kind that looks like it's been through a few too many accidents and never got reported. My phone buzzed. Your driver is here. I went outside, and the second I saw the guy in the driver's seat, I knew I made a mistake. He didn't look like a normal driver. He was wearing a baseball cap low over his eyes, and there was something off about his face. He looked sweaty, like clammy almost, but not in a nervous way, more like, I don't know how to describe it, just wrong. His clothes looked too clean for someone who'd drive a car like that. It was like he tried too hard to look normal but missed the mark completely. But still, I got in. I know, stupid. I keep replaying that moment in my head, wondering what the hell I was thinking. The second the door shut behind me, the air in that car changed. It felt thick. You know how sometimes you just feel like you've walked into something bad? Yeah, it was like that, but worse. I had to download this encrypted browser, and then there it was. It wasn't a polished website, just a black page with a few buttons. You had to enter your location manually, none of that automatic GPS stuff like Uber or Lyft. And the pricing? Dirt cheap, like ridiculously cheap. I figured it was just some hacker playing a prank, but whatever. I put in my address and selected a drop-off spot near a 24-hour diner I used to hit up when I had the munchies late at night. After a few minutes, I got a notification. Your ride will arrive in 10 minutes. And that's when I should have stopped, right then. I should have just shut my computer, gone to bed, and laughed about it in the morning. But no, I was too intrigued. I waited. I live in a small town, so there's not a lot of traffic late at night, especially around my neighborhood. When I saw headlights pull up outside, my gut sank. It was a beat-up old sedan. No markings, no Uber or Lyft sticker on the window, just a plain, dirty car. The kind that looks like it's been through a few too many accidents and never got reported. My phone buzzed. Your driver is here. I went outside, and the second I saw the guy in the driver's seat, I knew I made a mistake. He didn't look like a normal driver. He was wearing a baseball cap low over his eyes, and there was something off about his face. He looked sweaty, like clammy almost, but not in a nervous way, more like, I don't know how to describe it, just wrong. His clothes looked too clean for someone who'd drive a car like that. It was like he tried too hard to look normal but missed the mark completely. But still, I got in. I know, stupid. I keep replaying that moment in my head, wondering what the hell I was thinking. The second the door shut behind me, the air in that car changed. It felt thick. You know how sometimes you just feel like you've walked into something bad? Yeah, it was like that, but worse. He finally looked back at me through the mirror again, but this time his smile was gone. Instead, he muttered something under his breath. I couldn't catch it at first, but he said it again, louder this time. "You're not the first." I froze. What the hell did that mean? Not the first what? I wanted to scream, but my throat felt like it was closing up. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold my phone. I felt trapped. Every second that passed made the car feel smaller and smaller, like it was closing in on me. I swear I thought I was going to die right there. After what felt like forever, the car slowed down. But we weren't anywhere near the diner. We weren't anywhere near civilization at all. He pulled off the road, onto this dirt path that I didn't even know existed. There were no signs, no nothing. Just this bumpy road leading into the middle of nowhere. The trees were so dense that even the moonlight barely got through. We drove down this path for what felt like hours, but it was probably only 10 minutes. Finally, the car stopped. We were in this... I don't even know how to describe it. It was like a ghost town. Old, broken down buildings, no lights, no people, just silence. The driver turned off the car, and for a moment, we just sat there in the dark. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then, without a word, he got out. That's when I knew I had to get the hell out of there. I've had my fair share of scary experiences in life, but nothing compares to this. Not even close. You ever hear about people getting stuck in bad situations and wonder how they let it get that far? I used to think I'd never be that guy, but I was, and now I know it can happen to anyone. As soon as the driver stepped out of the car, I lost it. Full-blown panic. My heart was racing like it was trying to escape my chest. I fumbled with the door handle again, praying that maybe, just maybe, I could force it open. But of course it was still locked. I looked around the car, hoping to find something, anything, that I could use to break the window. But there was nothing. The car was old and filthy, but completely empty. Then I saw him through the window. He wasn't standing by the driver's side door like I thought he would be. He had moved around to the back of the car, walking slow, almost casually. The weirdest part. He was dragging something along the ground. At first, I couldn't make it out in the darkness. But as he moved closer to the trunk, the moonlight caught the edge of it. It was a fucking axe. I swear, my blood went ice cold. I don't know how, but I managed to stay quiet, even though every instinct in me was screaming to get out of there. He didn't seem to be in a rush. He just stood by the trunk for a second, then lifted the lid. I couldn't see what was inside from where I was sitting, but the sound that came out, it was like the creaking of old metal, followed by this soft, wet thud, like something heavy had been dropped in there before. I knew I couldn't sit there any longer. If I didn't move, I was going to die in that car. I was sure of it. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely control them, but I managed to pull up the back seat lever. You know, the one that lets you crawl into the trunk? I don't even know why I thought that was a good idea. The adrenaline was taking over, and I wasn't thinking straight, but I needed to hide, needed to do something. I wriggled into the trunk area, trying to be as quiet as possible, my heart pounding so loud in my chest I was sure he'd hear it. As I got into the cramped space, my hand brushed against something cold and wet. My first thought was that the car was leaking, but when I brought my hand up to my face to check what it was, I nearly threw up. It was blood. fresh blood. And it wasn't just a little. The entire trunk floor was smeared with it like someone had dragged something, or someone, across it. That's when the smell hit me. The kind of smell that once you've smelled it, you can never forget. Rotting flesh. I gagged, covering my mouth with both hands, desperately trying not to make a sound. I could hear him moving outside, slow, deliberate footsteps, like he knew I was in there and he was taking his time. I didn't have a plan. I didn't know what to do. My mind was racing, running through every possible option, but none of them seemed to work out. I couldn't stay in that trunk. He'd find me eventually. But if I made a break for it, he'd definitely catch me. Then I heard the trunk click. He was opening it. I froze. I didn't even breathe. I could hear the hinges creaking as he slowly lifted it. And for a split second, I thought about charging him, trying to knock him over and run. But when I peeked through a small gap, what I saw stopped me dead. Inside the trunk, just inches from where I was hiding, was a body. A woman, or at least what used to be one. Her face was barely recognizable, skin stretched tight over her skull, her eyes wide open in this horrific frozen expression. There was blood everywhere, I'm talking pools of it. Her arms were twisted at odd angles, like someone had snapped them in half and just let them dangle there. She was stuffed in there, lifeless, like she was just another piece of garbage. I don't know how I didn't scream. The driver just stood there for a second, looking down at her like he was admiring his work. Then, without warning, he slammed the trunk shut again. The noise was deafening in the silence of the night. He must have thought I wasn't in the car anymore because he started muttering to himself. I couldn't make out all of it, but I caught enough to know that I wasn't dealing with someone sane. She's not ready yet. Not yet. Needs more time, he whispered, dragging that axe across the gravel as he moved toward one of the broken-down buildings in the ghost town. I peeked out through a crack in the back window, watching him disappear into the shadows. He was talking to someone, or something, but there was no one else there. I couldn't just sit there. If I stayed, I was dead. I knew that much. But running through a ghost town in the middle of the night with no phone signal and a psycho with an axe hunting me, not much of an option either. My mind was spinning, trying to figure out how I could get out of this. I looked around the car one last time, desperately searching for something, anything, that could help me. That's when I noticed the key still in the ignition. He didn't take it out. It was my one chance. If I could just make it to the front seat and start the car, I might be able to get out of there before he realized what was happening. I carefully crawled back into the main part of the car, moving slow as hell so I wouldn't make any noise. My hands were slippery with sweat and blood, and I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs. The whole time, I kept glancing out the window, terrified he'd pop out of the shadows at any second. When I finally made it to the front seat, I reached for the keys with trembling fingers. But just as I was about to turn the ignition, I heard it. The sound of heavy footsteps crunching on the gravel. He was coming back. I froze again, my hand hovering over the keys, praying he wouldn't notice the slight shift in the car's weight. I could hear him dragging the axe, getting closer and closer, his breathing heavy and labored like some kind of animal. He was muttering again, but this time it was louder, angrier. "You can't hide forever," he said, his voice low and menacing. "I'll find you. I always do." I didn't have time to think. I just turned the key. The engine roared to life, way louder than I expected in the dead silence of that place. I slammed the car into drive, and without even looking, I floored it. The tires screeched against the dirt, and the car lurched forward, nearly fishtailing as I tried to keep control. I could see him in the rearview mirror, standing there with the axe raised, staring after me. But he didn't run. He didn't chase me. Instead, he just stood there, smiling that sick, dead smile like he knew something I didn't. All right, so there I was, speeding away from that psycho, heart pounding in my throat, hands shaking so bad I could barely grip the steering wheel. But I didn't care. I just needed to get the hell out of there. The car rattled and shook as I flew down that dirt road, the headlights barely cutting through the thick trees on either side of me. My brain was running on pure adrenaline, and every time I blinked, all I could see was that twisted smile in the rearview mirror. the axe in his hand gleaming under the moonlight. I should have felt relieved. I should have thought I was safe. But something wasn't right. My gut was screaming at me. You know that feeling when you just know you're not out of the woods yet? That was me, cranked up to 11. The road stretched on forever, but no matter how far I drove, the scenery didn't change. Just the same dark trees, the same eerie silence. I didn't recognize anything, even though I had driven this far out before. Nothing looked familiar. My phone still had no signal and the GPS wasn't loading. The only thing I had to go on was the dirt road ahead of me and the hope that it would eventually spit me out somewhere near civilization. I glanced in the rearview mirror again, half expecting to see him running after me, but the road behind me was empty. That should have made me feel better, but it didn't. In fact, it made things worse. How the hell did he not chase me? And why the hell was he smiling like that? I shook it off. Just get the hell out of here, I told myself, knuckles white on the steering wheel. But as I pressed down harder on the gas, the car began to make this weird clunking noise. At first, I thought it was just the shitty road, but it got louder. Worse. The engine started to sputter. No, come on! I slammed my hand against the steering wheel, but it was no use. The car jerked violently, then slowed down until it finally rolled to a stop. Right there in the middle of nowhere, my only shot at getting out of there just died on me. I sat there staring at the dashboard, waiting for some miracle, but nothing happened. The car was done, dead, and I was stranded. I tried the key again, over and over, but all I got was that sickening, sputtering noise. The car wasn't going anywhere. I cursed out loud, kicking the door in frustration, but deep down, I knew I was screwed. That's when the paranoia set in. I started looking around, my eyes darting between the trees, convinced he was out there, watching me, waiting. I could feel it. My breath was coming in quick, shallow gasps, and I realized I couldn't just sit there like a sitting duck. I had to move. Staying in that car wasn't an option. So I grabbed my phone, even though it was useless, and stepped out into the cold night air. It hit me like a brick, the kind of chill that sinks into your bones. The silence out there was suffocating. Not even the sound of crickets. Just nothing. I started walking, staying as close to the road as possible, but the deeper I went, the more that feeling of being watched grew. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and every few steps, I found myself whipping around, expecting him to be right behind me, axe in hand. But the road stayed empty. I walked for what felt like hours. My feet were aching, my legs burning from the effort. Still, no sign of life. No houses, no lights, no cars. Just this endless, suffocating darkness pressing in on me from every direction. Then up ahead, I saw something. A light. Just a faint glow in the distance. My heart jumped into my throat. Maybe it was a gas station. Maybe someone who could help me. I didn't care what it was, as long as it meant getting out of that nightmare. I started running, fast. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't a gas station. It was a house. An old, run-down house, sitting in the middle of the woods like it had been forgotten by time. The windows were dark, but there was a single light flickering on the porch, casting these long, eerie shadows across the yard. I should have kept walking. I should have just turned around and kept moving, but I was desperate. I was tired, cold, and scared out of my mind. I needed help. So I made my way up to the porch, stepping carefully as the boards creaked under my weight. When I knocked on the door, the sound echoed through the house. But there was no answer. I knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. That's when I noticed the door was slightly ajar. Just a crack, enough for me to push it open if I wanted to. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest, every instinct telling me to walk away. But what choice did I have? I was stranded in the middle of nowhere, being hunted by a lunatic with an axe. If there was a chance someone in there could help me, I had to take it. I pushed the door open slowly, wincing as it creaked on its rusty hinges. The inside of the house was pitch black, but I could make out the outline of some old furniture. It smelled like dust and decay, like no one had lived there for years. I took a step inside, my foot hitting something soft. I looked down and saw a pile of clothes on the floor, torn, filthy clothes, like someone had ripped them off in a hurry. I called out, my voice shaky. "Hello? Is anyone here?" Nothing. Just the sound of my own breathing, echoing in the empty house. I should have left. I should have turned around and walked right back out that door. But something pulled me further in. Maybe it was the hope that I'd find a phone or something. Maybe I was just too scared to face the darkness outside again. I took a few more steps, and that's when I heard it. A faint scratching sound, like nails scraping against wood. It was coming from upstairs. I froze, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. There was no way in hell I was going up there, but at the same time I couldn't just stand there. I backed up toward the door, my eyes locked on the dark staircase leading up to the second floor. That's when the door behind me slammed shut. I spun around, yanking at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. It was like it had been locked from the outside. Panic surged through me as I pounded on the door, screaming for help. But there was no one out there, no one who could hear me. The only sound was the scratching, getting louder, closer. I turned around again, and that's when I saw him, standing at the top of the stairs, illuminated by the faint light coming through a crack in the ceiling. It was the driver. But something was wrong. He wasn't holding the axe anymore. He wasn't even smiling that sick smile. He was just staring at me, dead-eyed, his face pale as if all the blood had drained out of him. And the worst part, his hands, they were covered in blood. Not his blood, though. The same dark, sticky blood I'd seen in the trunk. I backed up, my back pressed against the door, as he slowly made his way down the stairs, each step deliberate, like he had all the time in the world. My breath caught in my throat as I realized he wasn't alone. Behind him, there were more. Shadows, dark figures, all moving slowly, like they were crawling out of the walls. They were silent, their faces blurred and twisted like something out of a nightmare. I grabbed the door handle again, yanking as hard as I could, but it wouldn't move. They were getting closer, their lifeless eyes locked on me, and all I could do was scream. Okay, so I'm trapped in this creepy-ass house with the driver, blood covering his hands, and these shadowy figures crawling out of the darkness behind him. They weren't fully human. I don't know what the hell they were, but they sure as hell weren't normal. Their movements were jerky, like puppets being yanked around by invisible strings. I couldn't see their faces clearly, but from the little I could make out, they were twisted, misshapen, wrong. I yanked on that door handle like my life depended on it, because it did. But it wasn't budging, and my hands were so sweaty I could barely grip it. My breathing was out of control. I felt like I was suffocating, and every breath I took just made the room feel smaller, more claustrophobic. The driver was halfway down the stairs now, his feet dragging across the wooden steps, making this horrible scraping sound that echoed in the silence. Behind him, those things, whatever they were getting closer. I could feel the air around me change, like the temperature had dropped a few degrees. The hairs on my arms were standing straight up. I did the only thing I could think of. I bolted. I don't even know where I was running to. I just needed to get away from them. I darted into a hallway off to the side, the floor creaking under my weight. I could hear them behind me, the driver's slow, deliberate footsteps mixed with the quick, shuffling noises of the shadows. I didn't dare look back. My whole body was in survival mode. The hallway was long, and the farther I ran, the darker it got. There were old, faded paintings on the walls, but I couldn't make out the faces. Just dark shapes, smudged with age and dirt. The floor beneath me felt unstable, like it could collapse at any moment, but I didn't stop. I found a door at the end of the hall. It was one of those old, heavy wooden ones, with rusted hinges and a tarnished brass handle. I grabbed the handle and pushed, praying it wasn't locked. To my relief, the door creaked open, revealing a small room. It looked like an old study, Dusty bookshelves lined the walls, and there was a massive desk in the center covered in papers that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. The air smelled stale, like no one had been in there for a long time. I slammed the door shut behind me and twisted the lock. It was one of those old-fashioned deadbolts that slid into place with a heavy click. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get it locked, but once it was, I backed away from the door, gasping for air, but it wasn't over. I knew that. I leaned against the desk, trying to catch my breath, but my mind was racing. I could still hear them, faint shuffling sounds outside the door. They weren't knocking or trying to break in, just standing there, waiting. I could hear the driver whispering something, but I couldn't make out the words. It sounded like a chant, almost, low, guttural, like he was speaking in some language I didn't understand. My whole body was tense, like I was waiting for something horrible to happen, but nothing did. That's when I noticed something strange about the room. The walls. They weren't just lined with books. There were symbols, carved into the wood. They were faint, almost like someone had tried to scratch them out over the years, but I could still make them out. Circles, triangles, and these weird spirals. I've never seen anything like them, but just looking at them made my stomach churn. My eyes scanned the desk, and that's when I saw it. A piece of paper, yellowed with age, crumpled up like someone had been gripping it tightly before abandoning it there. I don't know why I picked it up. Maybe I thought it would give me some clue about what was going on. But as soon as I unfolded it, I regretted it. The handwriting was frantic, scribbled like whoever wrote it was losing their mind. It was a letter, and the more I read, the more my blood ran cold. I hear them at night, scratching, whispering. They want in. I can't stop them. I can't stop what's coming. The driver is just the start. He's the one who brings them, but he's not the worst of it. They feed on fear. They take you when you're alone, when you're most afraid. Once they've marked you, there's no escape. I thought I could run, but the town is the trap. The town is the trap. My stomach dropped. It felt like the floor was falling out from under me. This wasn't just some random psycho in a ghost town. This was planned. Whatever was happening, it had been happening for a long time, and I had walked right into it. The scratching at the door grew louder, more desperate. I could hear the wood splintering, and I knew they were trying to get in. My mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. I glanced around the room, looking for something, anything, that could help. Then I saw it. In the corner of the room, behind a dusty old chair, there was a small door. It was barely noticeable, blending in with the wood panels of the wall. It looked like a crawl space, maybe a basement or an attic hatch. I didn't have time to think. I rushed over and yanked it open, revealing a narrow set of stairs leading down into the darkness. I didn't have a choice. I wasn't staying in that room to face whatever the hell was behind that door. I grabbed my phone for light and started descending the stairs as quietly as I could. My heart was pounding in my ears, my legs trembling with every step. The air down there was damp and musty, and the further I went, the more the smell of rot hit me. The walls were lined with more of those symbols, scratched into the stone like they'd been there for centuries. My phone's flashlight barely cut through the darkness, but it was enough to see the narrow corridor stretching out in front of me. I was underground, some kind of tunnel. The walls were cold and slick with moisture, and the ground was uneven beneath my feet. But I kept moving. I didn't know where the tunnel led, but I had to believe it was better than whatever was upstairs. I kept walking, my breath shallow, every step echoing off the walls. The further I went, the more I noticed the tunnel sloping downward. It was subtle at first, but eventually I was practically walking downhill. The air got thicker, harder to breathe, like something was pressing down on me. And then the tunnel opened up into a chamber. It was huge, far bigger than I expected, with a ceiling that stretched up into the darkness. There were more symbols carved into the walls, but this time they were glowing faintly. A sickly greenish light that seemed to pulse, like the walls were alive. In the center of the chamber was a circle of stones, each one covered in the same twisted markings. And at the far end of the room, standing in the shadows, was a figure. I couldn't make out the details at first, but as I stepped closer, my flashlight flickered over them. It was the driver, but he wasn't alone. There was something with him. A shape crouched behind him, twisted and unnatural, its limbs too long, its face a blur of shadows. It looked like it had crawled straight out of a nightmare. And as soon as I saw it, it turned toward me. My legs locked up. I couldn't move. I couldn't even scream. I couldn't. The driver's voice echoed through the chamber, low and guttural, like he was speaking from somewhere deep within the earth. "You were never leaving," he said. "You were always meant to come here." And that's when it hit me. This wasn't about the ride. This wasn't about the town. This was about me. I had been lured here, marked somehow, and now they had me exactly where they wanted. The shadows behind him moved, stretching out, crawling toward me, and all I could do was watch. I wish I could tell you that I had some brilliant plan, that I figured out a way to fight back or run. But I was frozen, completely paralyzed with fear. My body refused to move. My brain was in shock. I was staring at the driver and that thing behind him, its long, unnatural limbs twitching like it was waiting for me to break. The whole time my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode in my chest. The driver stepped forward, his eyes locking onto mine. There was no humanity left in them, just emptiness. His voice echoed again, bouncing off the cold stone walls of the chamber. "You can't escape," he said, almost casually. "None of them ever do." I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything, but my legs were like lead. I couldn't think straight. The air in the room felt thick, like it was choking me, making it impossible to breathe. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to move, but my body was betraying me. Behind him, the shadows shifted again. That thing, whatever it was slowly crawling forward. I could hear its joints cracking, its limbs scraping against the stone floor. It made this low, gurgling sound, like it was savoring the moment, enjoying the fear that was radiating off me. The glow from the symbols on the walls seemed to pulse in time with its movements, lighting up its twisted silhouette in sickly green flashes. "You were chosen," the driver continued, his voice barely above a whisper now, like he was speaking some kind of twisted truth. "It was always going to be you. The ride was just the beginning. The fear, it feeds them." I felt my knees buckle, but somehow I stayed standing. I didn't know what he was talking about, but I didn't care. I didn't want to understand. I just wanted to survive. Finally, my body kicked into gear. My survival instinct took over. Without thinking, I bolted. I didn't know where I was going. I just ran back the way I came, my footsteps echoing through the tunnel, the air growing colder and thicker the further I went. Behind me, I heard the driver's laughter. It wasn't loud or manic. It was soft, like he was amused, like this was all a game to him. And the worst part, I could still hear that thing crawling behind me, its limbs scraping against the stone, getting closer and closer. I was running blind, the light from my phone flickering as I sprinted through the tunnel. Every time I thought I was putting distance between me and them, I'd hear that gurgling sound again, closer than before. It was like it was toying with me, letting me run just far enough to give me hope before closing in. I don't know how long I ran. Time didn't exist down there. All I knew was that my legs were burning, my lungs felt like they were on fire, and every part of me was screaming to get out. Finally, I saw it. Up ahead, a faint light. The exit. I don't know how I made it there, but it was real. I pushed myself harder, legs pumping, practically throwing myself toward the light. I burst out of the tunnel into the cold night air, stumbling onto the ground outside. I was back in the ghost town. The ruined buildings loomed around me like silent, forgotten tombstones. But there was no time to catch my breath. I had to keep moving. I scrambled to my feet, my legs shaking, and ran toward the only thing I could think of, the car. It was still there, exactly where I'd left it, sitting on that dirt path. My hands were trembling as I grabbed the door handle and yanked it open. I jumped inside, slammed the door shut, and jammed the key into the ignition. It wouldn't start. No, no, no! I slammed my hand against the dashboard, my heart pounding in my ears. I twisted the key again, praying it would turn over. The engine sputtered, coughing like it was about to die. And that's when I saw them. In the distance, standing at the edge of the ghost town, I could see the driver. He was just standing there, his face hidden in shadow, but I knew it was him. And behind him, those things. Dozens of them. They weren't shadows anymore. I could see them clearly now, crawling and twitching at his feet, their long limbs bending in ways that shouldn't have been possible. Their faces, if you could even call them that, were just empty black holes where their eyes should have been, like they were voids feeding off the darkness. I twisted the key one last time and miraculously the engine roared to life. Without thinking, I floored it, the tires kicking up dirt as I sped down the road. The headlights cut through the dark and I didn't dare look back. I just drove as fast as I could, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. The road stretched on forever. Every time I thought I was getting somewhere, the trees seemed to close in, like the road itself was trying to trap me. But I kept driving. I had to get out. I couldn't stop. It must have been hours later when I finally saw something. A gas station. A real one, with lights and everything. I pulled in, slamming the brakes and skidding to a stop in front of the building. I threw the car into park and practically fell out of the driver's seat, my legs too weak to hold me up. I stumbled inside, gasping for air, covered in sweat and dirt. The guy behind the counter looked at me like I was a madman, but I didn't care. I begged him for a phone, trying to explain what had happened, but the words wouldn't come out right. I must have looked insane, rambling about shadow creatures and a psycho with an axe. The guy just stared at me, wide-eyed, like he was trying to decide if he should call the cops or throw me out. But eventually, he handed me the phone, and I called the only person I could think of, my friend who had borrowed my car. When he picked me up an hour later, I didn't even try to explain. I couldn't. There was no way to make it sound believable. I just told him I got lost, that some psycho had tried to kill me, and we left it at that. But I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened, about what the driver had said. The town wasn't just a trap, it was a feeding ground. Those things, whatever they were still out there, waiting, and I had barely escaped. I haven't slept right since that night. Every time I close my eyes, I see them, crawling in the dark, waiting for me to slip up, waiting for me to come back. And the worst part? I know I wasn't the first person they'd lured there, but I sure as hell might not be the last.